Good morning for those joining us from the US and its environs. Good afternoon for those in Africa. And for those who may come from the Far East, good evening. We will start shortly. The Inception workshop for our first Africa Regional Priority Setting Workshop. This workshop has been organized by the Minor Use Foundation. The Minor Use Foundation, alongside other institutions, seeks to bring African countries together to virtually discuss regional minor use priorities and at the end provide a refined priority list for reference during consideration for establishment of potential field trials in collaboration with countries. Africa has had a fair challenge in pest invasions, the fall armyworm that hit Africa hard in 2016, wiping hectares of produce and threatening food security. Massive swarms of desert locusts invaded Eastern Africa in 2019, destroying hundreds of thousands of hectares of crops and worsening food shortages in at least 8 countries. The climate crisis is also compounding this problem. Notwithstanding all these challenges, the continent continues to seek new and effective methods of pest control that would safeguard her agriculture. Therefore, working with the Minor Use Foundation is critical in the search for better and more alternatives in pest management of minor crops for Africa. It is important to seek these collaborations in pest management, especially in the challenging and changing regulatory environment. The priorities set through this process form the basis of establishment of field trials with the goal of generating and submitting data for establishment of Codex MRLs. African countries defer to Codex MRLs, yet they do not optimally participate in the process of generating data to support the setting of MRLs, especially for minor uses. Therefore, few MRLs exist for our commodities and uses of interest. I therefore take this opportunity to welcome you to this dialogue, and we may now begin our program today. Well, to start with, it's good that we all know our housekeeping instructions as provided by our organizers, that we stay muted when not speaking. Rename yourself, starting with your first name and bracketing it, ending with the country name. At the bottom, the taskbar, select the interpretation toolbox to select your preferred language. We remind you that you can raise your questions in the chat provided. Your questions can be typed there. And to raise your hand, please put a Q in the chat box at the appropriate time. Let me then take this opportunity without further ado to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Dirk Drost. Dr. Drost is a board member of the Council of Agriculture, Science and Technology and the board chairman of the Minor Use Foundation. He has a vast experience in crop protection and the minor use industry. He is going to take us through his presentation, Harnessing the Power of Collaboration to Benefit Growers and Reduce Trade Barriers. Let us join now and welcome Dirk to give us his presentation. Welcome, Dirk.
Thank you, Lucy, and welcome to all of our participants on the continent and elsewhere. I'm grateful and thankful for the opportunity to talk with you today. Next slide. I'd like to share with you some information about the Minor Use Foundation and its vision and its mission. And I'll do that by stating our objectives. As Lucy mentioned, we desire to establish a collaborative international approach to address MRL needs for specialty crops and minor uses. We plan to implement research programs based on the priorities that are the outcome of meetings like the one we're starting on today, and also the global minor use priority setting workshops. We plan to fund research programs which will allow, based on those priorities, allow us to obtain and maintain harmonized MRLs, which will benefit trade on the continent and between your trading partners. And we wish to coordinate our activities with organizations that work throughout the world, including governments, grower groups, and specialty crop and minor use organizations. We seek our funding from government grants, from foundations, from other nonprofits, and from industry to support this research and future Global Minor Use Summit meetings. We have established an advisory council, which also provides advice and input to the board. And we look forward to working with our advisory council and achieving our objectives in coordination with them. And finally, we are a registered nonprofit in the United States. Our reach is global, and our programs are principally outside of the US, in Africa, in Asia, and in Latin America. Next slide. Just a few current updates. We have a website, which many of you are familiar with because you used it to access the registration materials. We welcome you to explore our website and interact with us in that way. And recently we held a global minor use priority setting workshop. We did that in late 2020. We've also conducted some other regional priority setting workshops in Asia. We're currently in the process of conducting one in Latin America and the Caribbean. And today is the Inception workshop for the Africa regional priority setting session, which will be held later on this year. The outputs from these workshops will be used as inputs into the next global minor use priority setting workshop that we hope to hold in late 2023, and also will guide the implementation of our Codex MRL priorities, our implementation program on the continent and in other areas of the world as represented here. Next slide. I'd like to, in advance of the Inception workshop today, express my thanks to you as participants for joining us. We are excited to sponsor this interactive session where we can engage with people like yourselves who are involved on a day-to-day basis with the challenges associated with missing and misaligned MRLs. We appreciate your participation and support in today's workshop. I would like to particularly acknowledge the work that we've been able to do with CropLife Africa and the Middle East, and the collaboration with them in coordinating Africa regional initiatives and getting this meeting set up today. Likewise, to the others who are participating in the session, thank you so much for your input and for your preparations. And Lucy, I'm going to turn it back over to you now, thanking you for being our moderator and letting you take the program forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dirk. Thank you very much for this opportunity, really, to be your moderator. And thank you, participants, for joining in this very important discussion. We have heard that this is the third such priority setting workshop for the African region, and really the Minor Use Foundation is looking to collaborate with both organizations within government as well as outside of government. Now, without further ado, allow me to introduce Ms. Anna Gore. Ms. Anna Gore is the Director of Operations with the Minor Use Foundation. She's a seasoned international development and trade policy professional for many years and has a vast experience in agricultural development. She will provide us a presentation on the overview and introduction to the Minor Use Foundation programs. And For those who are joining us now, please remember to put your first name and last name and bracket that with your country. Thank you very much and welcome, Ms. Anna Gore.
Thank you, Lucy. I'm very pleased to be with you all today. This is a really important meeting, and thank you for joining us. So you can go to the next slide. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about building on what Dirk shared, the Minor Use Foundation, why we do what we do, and how this meeting fits into the broader work of the foundation. So as you may be aware, minor use commodities enjoy less global investment than major uses. That's sort of how they get their name, in the fact that they have less cultivation globally by economic value or by acreage. But minor use commodities are incredibly important. They're essential for biodiversity, for nutrition, and for economic growth. They can be incredibly valuable commodities. So that's why the Minor Use Foundation exists, to help establish standards for minor use commodities. And then, this is an example here that I have of a study that was conducted in South Africa, where you can see that even though minor use commodities, as I mentioned, make up less of the overall acreage that's grown in agriculture, they made up over 50% of the essential nutrients, including calcium, vitamin A, and vitamin C, that were being consumed in this study. And many of the participants in the study grew these commodities on their own farm, meaning we primarily focus on supporting smallholder farmers. So next slide, please. So if you look at kind of those trends and how they can be extrapolated out to the broader global food security challenges that we face, you can see here that Africa faces a lot of food insecurity challenges. And the darker the image of red, or the color of red on the screen, you can see the more severe the food security challenges there. So we try to focus our programming in such a way that we can have an impact on global food insecurity. Next slide, please. And as Dirk mentioned, we also really try to alleviate unnecessary trade barriers related to MRLs, missing and missing aligned MRLs. So this graphic here is showing in the European Union where they're removing some MRLs. Some of you are aware of this ongoing effort that the EU is making to change their system from a risk-based risk assessment system and setting standards to a hazard-based system. And as a result of that, are removing a lot of approved uses for pesticides. And so this graph shows the expected economic or projected economic impact of that regulatory change. And you can see that specialty crops or minor use crops are disproportionately affected here. So the blue parts of the graph show the commodities that are expected to be affected by the EU's regulatory changes, and the green shows commodities that are anticipated to not be affected. So you can see that fruits and nuts, which are minor crops, are the most affected, and they are anticipated to lose market access entirely, which is over $18 billion globally. Oil seeds and groundnuts, which generally would also qualify as specialty crops. And here you can also see coffee, tea, and spices will almost entirely lose market access, and cocoa. So there's a lot of economic importance and value in the international trading system as well to support for established uses for minor use commodities. Next slide, please. So now I'm just going to talk a little bit about specifically what the Minor Use Foundation does and how it works. And just a reminder to please mute yourself if you can. I think there's some background noise. Okay, so thank you. The first step in our operational model is to undergo priority setting, which is what we're doing today. So we begin by having our priority setting workshops where we get as much input as possible from the region, from stakeholders in the region on what the biggest barriers are for minor use cultivation in the region, what the biggest crop pest and disease barriers are. And then we work to find solutions to those. And once we complete this process, so we're beginning it today, and over the next few months, we'll accept nominations and then ultimately come up with a finalized, we'll have ranked voting and ultimately develop a finalized list of priorities. Then we have our list of projects that we will work to address over the next few years. We have our research agenda, and then we begin studies. So then we form the field teams. This is an example of a kickoff meeting here where we have people that will be conducting the field trials. We have regulators, we have lab technicians as well. And then we go ahead and conduct the field trials. We have our technical experts support in the application and the conduction of the field trials, as well as the subsequent lab analysis. And those both together form the generation of a data package, which then we send, which then gets a national registration in the country where the study was conducted. So we register the pesticide from with the data that we generate. Excuse me. And then we send that data package to JMPR to establish Codex MRL so that an international trading standard exists for that commodity. Next slide, please. This is another kind of visual representation, another way of understanding the way we work. So we're located here, the Minor Use Foundation in the US. And we begin the process by engaging with growers, but not just growers, also regulators, folks from crop protection companies, any stakeholder that's involved in this process. But we begin the process by engaging in Latin America, Africa, and Asia in meetings such as this one to better understand the regional priorities. Once we have our regional priorities established, we get that information to the Minor Use Foundation. We begin our field trials and our research in country. And then finally, we collate the data, we put it together, and then we send it to JMPR, which ultimately goes to the Codex Committee on Pesticide Residues for the establishment of an international standard to facilitate trade. And one thing that I like about this image is you can see here how our model really does help make Codex more representative, because we're conducting research really all over the world to help support for the establishment of Codex MRLs globally. I think there are a few more slides, but we can just skip right through those. I think Dirk covered a lot of the meetings we've held most recently, so you can just go, yeah, you can go right to the end. I think that's fine. Yeah, you can keep going. Yeah, so there's my contact information. Thank you all so much. I hope that information was informative, and I look forward to a productive session with you all today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anna. You've actually saved some time in the presentation. A few notes that we have learned there, the process of coordination, the process of the work, the actual work in data collection and generation of the data, and how this operational model really is implemented. Perhaps a reminder again for all of us joining, please rename yourself on your device so that you display your first name, last name, and in brackets, please include your country, the country in which you are coming from. Now, allow me at this point to welcome Joanna Brown, who will be our next presenter. Joanna is a Foreign Service trainee with the United States Department of Agriculture's Foreign Agricultural Service and will serve as an Agricultural Affairs Attaché for the US, pending an initial assignment abroad. Ms. Brown has over 10 years of experience in agriculture, food, and international trade. She has worked for multiple US government agencies with a focus in international trade, including the US FDA and the US Customs and Border Protection. Currently, she's part of the Foreign Agricultural Services Maximum Residue Limits team, where she manages technical assistance programs related to pesticides and crop protection matters in Africa, which means she's really going to be our partner. She's going to provide remarks from the USDA FAS. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Brown. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Lucy. And greetings from Washington, D.C. It's a pleasure to join the Minor Use Foundation in this Inception workshop. As Lucy mentioned, my name is Joanna Brown, and I'm representing the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And I have the privilege of sharing a few remarks. I don't have a presentation on behalf of my agency, the Foreign Agricultural Service. I'm a part of the team that works on maximum residue limits, or MRLs, and crop protection programs. And to provide a little context on our work, since 2012, for almost a decade, FAS has built a global portfolio of technical assistance projects to strengthen regulatory systems across the globe for the safe, judicious, and appropriate use of pesticides. So globally, FAS sees these programs as creating more resilient, productive, and profitable food and agricultural systems, particularly, as noted earlier, in a changing climate and amongst global discussions on sustainability for agricultural production practices. We understand that this is an important discussion to have, and we know it's an ambitious undertaking. So how do we tackle this here at FAS? How do we achieve these goals of strengthening these regulatory systems and hopefully seeing these productive, resilient agricultural systems? Well, we have these strategic partnerships with countries, with regional economic communities, with universities, and with nonprofits like the Minor Use Foundation. So specifically on the African continent, we partner with regional economic communities like the EAC, like ECOWAS, like SADC, like the WAPRC. And one of our key partnerships is with the Minor Use Foundation. And in our partnership with the Minor Use, we support the international standards. We help support the addition to the international standards that are set in Codex. And as I think was previously mentioned, or you all may already likely be aware, the Codex Alimentarius has a dual mandate of protecting consumer health and ensuring the fair practices in food trade through the development of international science-based standards. So it's a consensus body, and it plays a crucial role. Codex plays a crucial role in food safety and food trade, and with this food security by creating these standards that growers can abide by. So, excuse me. So FAS, we support these efforts. Specifically, we help in the process to create these maximum residue limits that are established in Codex for pesticides that are important for all growers of minor use crops. And we have a success story that is based on the continent. So in 2019, data was collected across multiple countries, including Ghana, Senegal, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, to control the impact of fruit flies on mango using a certain pesticide. And I understand it was recently accepted through the joint FAO-WHO meeting on pesticide residues, JMPR, and I understand it should be established shortly within CCPR. So that's something we're happy that we are part of, and look forward to continuing to see those success stories through this process that the Minor Use Foundation has set, and working with you all on the ground. So as part of our work with the Minor Use Foundation, we help to prioritize these issues that are important to minor use growers. So to identify which crop chemicals should be added to the Codex MRLs. We also support improving lab capacity by teaching teams how to conduct residue analysis. We encourage country collaboration to split these trials that are required by Codex. And I believe Anna and Dirk went over thoroughly that process of how that's done. So the goal is to incentivize replacing older and more toxic chemicals with newer, less toxic products. So ultimately, FAS, we see this as strategic, as Codex helps to facilitate international trade by creating these international standards for countries to adopt. And in a nutshell, we help to fund these important trials and to promulgate the importance of this work. So there's so much work to be done on this front, and we're glad to be a part of this and partnering with you all and the Minor Use Foundation. And so although our team is somewhat small and compared to other teams that are formed within our Department of Agriculture, we have these strategic partnerships that are very powerful. So in addition to myself, currently we have 3 other full-time employees based in Washington, D.C. that are on the maximum residue level team. And I'm happy to share that information. We can relay that information on the Minor Use Foundation website, because our team would love to hear from you all, from all the participants, to explore ways to improve our collaboration with you all and to deepen and essentially scale up our efforts on the continent of Africa. So I look forward to those discussions with you all. And I'm happy to be a part of this Inception workshop. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. Thank you very much, Joanna. Indeed, we have heard and cannot overemphasize the role of Codex in food safety and international trade, and more so in the importance of Codex MRLs in facilitating that trade. Now, of course, brings the question of not all commodities will have MRLs, therefore the need to actually work together to prioritize our work together so that we can have more commodity chemical MRLs being set and actually becoming Codex MRLs. We actually are very proud of the work that we had done in some years past, and we now have the MRL for Safuxaflor and Mango, which has just been passed at the concluded CCPR, hopefully to be adopted at the Commission. More importantly, I think Joanna emphasized the need to have strategic partnerships, and this is probably where we need to work smart and work together so that we can agree in the continent what our priorities are and how to move the work forward for getting new CXLs. Thank you very much, Anna, for your presentation. Maybe at this point, now that we seem to have gotten a few minutes ahead of time, if there are any questions, burning questions, you can place your cue in the chat box and we shall call upon you to ask your question before we go on to our next presenter, who I believe is ready. If we do not have any cues in the box, we can move on to our next presenter. As I do not see any, we will move on. Allow me now to introduce and welcome Dr. Nardien. Dr. Nardien is a toxicologist at the Ministry of Health in Senegal and Ministry of Health Poison Center. He is also a food safety specialist and works on contaminants, especially in the field of aflatoxin. Now, under the residues program, he is the Senegal team coordinator and also a member of the National Technical Committee, CCPR. He also is going to talk to us about the benefits of a minor use program, perspectives from Senegal. Allow me to welcome now Dr. Nardian. Dr. Dian, bienvenue. Colleagues, participants, as we wait to hear from Nar, allow me now to introduce Dr. Michael Braverman, who will speak to us shortly. Dr. Michael Braverman is a manager, biopesticide, organic support, and international capacity building programs at the IR4 project. He'll tell us more about that. He has extensive knowledge and experience in horticulture, biopesticides, residue work, and currently manages the organic support program, which develops and submits registration packages to the US EPA. He also manages an international capacity building program, primarily in Asia and Africa, on GLP magnitude of residue studies to develop codex MRLs in Asia and Africa. Michael has been with the IR4 since 1999. He will take us through the nomination and priority selection process. Dr. Michael Braverman, you are welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Thank you. Also, thank you for everyone in the audience today for your attendance and participation in this important meeting. I'll be covering the details on how you can nominate priorities and the overall selection process. Both this PowerPoint and a YouTube presentation will be posted on the Minor Use Foundation website so that you can review it as needed. If you have any questions, hopefully that can help you out. Otherwise, you're welcome to contact one of us to assist in your nominations. Next slide, please. So our overall goal is to develop a list of the top pest management priorities for Africa. So a priority consists of a crop and a pest. And the overall process will be nominating existing priorities or submitting new priorities, subsequently voting on the top priorities. Those priorities will then be ranked based on the votes, and that will lead us up to the workshop discussion. Next slide, please. So there are two types of nominations that you can make. You can nominate existing priorities from the Global Minor Use Workshop list, or you can nominate totally new priorities. So we want to develop a condensed but comprehensive list of priorities. Next slide, please. So two important things to understand is when you look over the list from the Global Minor Use Workshop list, just because it's on that list doesn't mean it's going to be part of the workshop. You have to nominate it in order to be part of the workshop. And secondly, the deadline for nominations will be August 22nd, 2022. Next slide, please. So some of the factors for consideration when nominating either existing priorities or submitting new priorities are that you should focus on top crop pest combinations with limited control options, but at least they should have some potential solutions. Should focus on horticultural, minor, or specialty crops rather than broad acre agronomic crops. Thirdly, you should focus on solutions that do not currently have a Codex MRL, because we want to promote international trade. And so we're trying to develop new Codex MRLs. We also want to focus on situations in which currently registered products are causing trade issues or have pest resistance problems. Next slide, please. So how do you go about nominating priorities? So this is a link to the URL of the place where you can have the opportunity to nominate priorities. And there are two different types of forms, one to nominate existing priority and another to submit new priorities. Next slide, please. First, let us go over the process of nominating existing priorities. So when you go on the Minor Use Foundation website, you will see this nomination form. First, view the current list of the global minor use priorities to see what is on the list, and simply write down the ID number found in column A. So this list is an Excel spreadsheet, and you simply look in column A for the ID number that is associated with the crop pest combination that is of interest to you. Then you fill out your personal information like your name, email, and country. Again, it's important to understand that the existing priorities will not be considered unless they are nominated. Next slide, please. So once you get that ID number off of the list, you enter it into this box where it says existing priority ID, and you click the box to autofill the rest of the information. And so the rest of the information should automatically go into the subsequent boxes. Next slide, please. Then just as a safety precaution, you want to click the box that I am not a robot, so we don't have anybody spamming our site, and then simply click the box that says submit. Next slide, please. So you should get a message back that says thank you, and it tells you that you submitted a certain priority with your country, an ID, the crop, and the pest. And then you can go ahead and either nominate another existing priority, or you could add a new priority. Next slide, please. So let's switch to nominating new priorities. So this is the same position that you were at previously. In other words, you just submitted a existing priority, and now you want to add a new priority. So all you have to do is click on this where it says add a new priority. Next slide, please. From the front page, you can also click here to directly nominate a new priority if you do not want to nominate existing priorities. Next slide, please. So again, you fill out your name, email, and country. Next slide, please. And then you scroll down to the place where it has crop and pest. Next slide, please. So when you click on the place where it says select crop, it will bring up a drop-down menu, and you can select from the crop that you're interested in. The crop that you're interested in is not listed. You can go all the way down to the bottom and select the word other, and then you could type in the name of the crop. Next slide, please. Same holds true for the target pest. You simply click on target pest. It will bring up a drop-down menu where you can click on the pest that you're interested in. If the pest that you are interested in is not present on the list, you can scroll down to the bottom, select other, and then you can type in the target name of the pest. Next slide, please. And then you just fill in some general information, whether you want this for the field or the greenhouse, the climate, and the discipline. Next slide, please. Again, you click on I am not a robot, and you should probably review it before you submit. Next slide, please. So when you click to review it, it will bring up the information that you entered. And so you want to check that it is correct. Next slide, please. If you find a problem, if there's some kind of error in there, then you would click back to form, and you can go back and make any corrections that are necessary. If everything is okay, then you click submit. Next slide, please. See, you have a lot of successes. You will receive this message again for thanking you. And again, it will list your country's name, crop, and the pest that you nominate. And you can simply repeat this process. You can change back and forth if you decide you want to either nominate an existing priority or submit another new priority. Next slide, please. And then there is a Excel spreadsheet where all the requests are compiled, and you could click on that to see whether or not your request is actually in there. And the easiest way to do that is to click on column T and find your email. And that will bring up all the submissions that are associated with your email. And then you can check again whether or not the information in here is correct. So there's no limit to the number of nominations you can make, whether they are existing priorities or they're new priorities. Next slide, please. So after all the priorities are in, they will be voted upon between August 29th, and they will be due by September 19th. So every person in the public sector has one vote, and you can only vote one time. But that during that one vote, you can select 5 priorities. So each priority should go from your highest priority, which you would select as priority 1, through priority 5, which is your lowest priority. We will then take the number of points for that particular priority. We will also count the number of countries voting for that priority, and that will determine the total points. So based on the total points, that is how the priorities will be ranked. And they'll be divided into fruit and nut crops and either agronomic, vegetable, and herb crops based on the total points. Next slide, please. So between the voting on August 29th and the time that they're due, September 19th, we will have the cumulative a list of nominating process, and we will come out with a focused list of ranked priorities. Next slide, please. So this list of priorities will be distributed on September 26th. And at that point, we will also have to have the ability to have input from industry on potential solutions they may have for the crop pest combinations that we have ranked. And then there will be a discussion of the merits of the priorities in combination with the potential solutions at the workshop on November 2nd. Next slide, please. So then once we get to the workshop, we will be considering the existing ranking of the priorities and whether or not things should be reprioritized. These are some of the criteria that are considered important, or you may have other criteria that you may consider important for the ranking. And we will decide whether or not these represent sufficient grounds to justify a change in the rankings during the workshop. Next slide, please. So again, the overall timeline is that the due date for the nominations is going to be due on August 22nd. So now, after this presentation, everybody knows how to make a nomination, right? As I mentioned, this will also be posted on the Minor Use Foundation, and there are no limit to the number of nominations that you can make. We will send out a cumulative list of nominated and new submissions on August 29th. And then once they're sent out on the 29th, we'll have the opportunity to vote on them between the 29th and September 19th. Remember, only one vote per person, but you can select your top 5 priorities. The rankings will be sent out to the participants on September 26th. And then we will also receive input from industry based on the ranked priorities by October 24th. Next, we will hold the Africa Priority Setting Workshop on November 2nd, and then we will have an ongoing process to determine potential solutions. And our ultimate goal is to conduct the residue studies and pursue Codex MRLs. And I believe that is the end of my presentation. If we have time for presentations, for questions.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you. Thank you for the detailed presentation on the nomination process, how the nomination process will be done, how to nominate existing priorities, new priorities, and very clear on that. Perhaps as it is coming to the hour, we still have a few minutes. We could have one question. I see something in the chat. I'm not sure that probably we can answer it from
I can see the question. So
we probably handle that.
Oh,
Paul
I'm sorry.
Ngaruya is from Kenya. Please go ahead, Michael.
Yes, so thank you for your question, Paul. The question is, with different interpretation of the phrase minor crop, can we nominate any crop, example, coffee, baby corn, etc., which we consider important? So certainly coffee and baby corn are examples of crops that can be submitted And we have existing projects on coffee. In fact, we have one going on right now with indoxacarabon coffee. When we consider things that are not minor crops, we're talking about crops such as rice, corn, soybeans that, on a global basis are some of the largest crops. If you have any doubts, please feel free to send me a question. Hey, do you think this would be a reasonable crop to nominate? But the examples you provided certainly are crops that we would consider minor or specialty crops.
Thank you very much, Michael. I believe that has been answered. And perhaps now we can get back to Nar sorting out something. We could move on then and give him a little more time to join us. We still have a few minutes ahead. We could have a few more questions. We can have a few more questions, perhaps one more, so that we give him time to join. Any questions? If you do have a question, please just either type it in the box or write. I see one from Christopher. He has asked, shall maize and sorghum be considered minor crops? Michael, maybe you can handle that.
Maize or corn or sorghum would be considered major crops. So those are probably not the type of crops that we would handle. I would say if there's a very minor pest, a specialty pest that might be present on one of those crops, we might take it up for consideration, but in general, not. If you want to think of it in this way, if you focus on things like fruits, vegetables, and herbs, you most likely considered a minor or specialty crop.
We move on to introduce Carmen Tu, who will be our next speaker. Dr. Carmen Tu is currently the Vice Chair of the CropLife International MRLs and Trade Task Force, and the Global MRL and the Global MRL and IT Strategy Leader at Corteva AgroScience. She has over 30 years experience in research and development and expertise in residues, MRLs, food safety, risk assessment, both human and environmental, experience also in regulatory and public affairs and formulations development. She has worked in R&D in Latin America for her first 13 years. She's also a 2021 Fellow Awardee of the American Chemical Society's Agro Division Award, the OECD Residue Chemistry Expert Working Group, and the CropLife America MRL and Trade Working Group. She's a member of the IUPAC, Pesticide Chemistry, and Corteva representative to the CCPR and JMPR. She will now give us a presentation on the importance of specialty crops and trade barriers on behalf of CropLife International. Thank you very much and welcome, Carmen.
Thank you so much, Lucy, for the kind words of introduction, and hello, everyone. Greetings from Indianapolis, USA. It is my pleasure to be here sharing with you some high-level slides from the CropLife International perspective on the importance of specialty crops and trade barriers. In addition, I wanted to mention that I have had firsthand experience working with capacity building projects that have been done by IR4 and the Minor Use Foundation for more than 10 years. And I will not specifically talk about that part, but I will welcome if you had specific questions about specific projects that have been done over the last 10 years or so. please place them in the chat, and I will be happy if we have time to go and share learning experiences from specific cases that the Global Capacity Building Project has generated over the last, as I said, 10 years or so. So with that, I will go to the next slide, please. And before going into the explaining what's the industry role on the specialty crops, given the kind of questions that have been raised so far in this workshop, I would like to offer my view on what the specialty crops are. In my opinion, specialty crops are those that are not necessarily growing everywhere in the world. So will be certain countries and certain agroecological climates that will grow specialty crops, as well as being the crops that are usually planted in small areas, small fields or farms in different parts of the world. So it's not a generalized use. We will call those field crops or row crops or large extension crops. So specialty crops, it's everything else. As Michael also mentioned, it's mostly about fruits and vegetables that are grown in small plots, and therefore these are considered to be a specialty crops. All right, and with that, I guess clarification, I'm gonna move into the actual content of my inputs here about industry role on specialty crops. The crop life team in general and certain companies in particular have been involved in supporting global capacity building projects since 2010 in order to generate data in cooperation between different parties and groups of interest. We have also partnered with the minor use community to advocate for regulations that will enable further extrapolation from the major uses to the specialty crops, as well as the crop grouping updates by themselves. So Codex has been working on probably nearly 20 years to update the crop groups. And then there are initiatives that are coming up in terms of specialty crops, or also called minor uses, at national or regional levels. So far, the crop grouping has not been harmonized, and therefore additional attention and advocacy efforts are needed for crop grouping in general. We are also looking at opportunities to integrate specialty crops into product development as it's possible in order to support MRLs on crop groups, as well as incorporate specialty crops or minor uses on specialty crops into global joint reviews of new compounds that are coming out to the market. We actively support projects that have international focus rather than something that will be addressing one country's needs, trying to have at least a group of countries, or if it's possible, a global program for residue data generation, as it's been in place from the OECD residue guideline for crop field trials since 2009, I believe was the last update. So there are specifications in the global guidelines from OECD about how to generate global residue programs by selecting and conducting trials in different countries of the world that are representative of the growing conditions for that particular crop. And then last but not least, at Crop Life, we are trying to leverage on learnings from past projects and programs and try to incorporate those into e-learning online tools that will incorporate provisions for crop grouping and specialty crops. On the next slide, please, I will want to make reference to what exactly are registrants bringing to the table when we cooperate for these capacity building programs. So what you see there with the bullet points listed is essentially what a registrant would do. So we provide test material, analytical methods, we ship the GLP certified sample to the locations that are gonna do the field trials. We offer technical support for protocol review as well as for the study reporting to ensure that international requirements will be incorporated into the protocol and respectively the study report, and it will be acceptable to most agencies that are going to have to review and approve that for MRL settings. We also offer support for processing and other like non-crop field residue studies, like for example, metabolism, rotational crops, if they were annual specialty crops, and several other studies beyond or besides the crop field residue trials that are generated by capacity building programs. We also offer whatever is applicable for each case from our internal databases in terms of efficacy to control certain pests on specific crops. And if we had any data from efficacy or residues from other countries, we are also generally happy to share that for new projects that are selected as priorities. We are assisting with the risk assessments that will be required for submissions at the national level, regional registrations, or at codex level. So essentially, it's the registrant that is going to conduct all the risk assessments that needs to be submitted for either or both label approval as well as the MRL setting. And then, last but not least, we are trying to incorporate new uses of new compounds as well as existing registered actives into the solutions for specialty crops. And you see there are several other initiatives in terms of support to crop group validation and extrapolation between crops. I think that's an important tool that is available for developing countries. On the next slide, please. So previous slide was about data generation, what registrants do to support data generation. This slide is about what registrants do in order to support the actual registrations on specialty crops. So specialty crops sometimes will be part of the staple food crops, like for example, the example that was brought up before of the sweet corn. It's a specialty part of the corn. So even though corn might not be a specialty crop, the fresh consumption, sweet corn will be eventually considered a specialty crop. So, we are trying to incorporate that when we generate data for the major uses. But those data packages are expensive to develop and take a lot of time. So we also face prioritization needs when we go through registration of new compounds or new uses of existing compounds. And therefore, specialty crops often don't make that priority list. And that's why, we have a second important priority for addressing specifically specialty crops. So while we select the priority crops, which will be major crops, we also make an intentional effort to see from the specialty crops, which are those that, are having increased production and trade. And therefore, we should incorporate into the registrations in different parts of the world. Or if we don't have data generated, what kind of global cooperation is possible in order to generate that data with shared efforts from multiple stakeholders. The next slide, please. So these are just a few examples of initiatives that CropLife has been part of. So I'm not going to go and read all those. You're going to have the slides. So you can check on that. If you have any question about any of those, please feel free to contact me or anybody in your countries that is part of the CropLife family. So just multiple initiatives since 2010, essentially to the date, we have been supportive of many initiatives on specialty crops and minor uses on specialty crops. The next slide, please. As future opportunities, as it's been mentioned several times already in this workshop, we consider that the use of codex, MRLs, CXL, it's the acronym for Codex MRLs, essentially. So we are looking forward to have Codex MRLs for minor uses to be adopted by all countries. You know, at this point in time, Codex, it's accepted only by about 70 countries out of the 189 members that Codex has. So there is a lot of space for having more countries or all Codex members to adopt Codex MRLs. And as part of that, you know, solutions for specialty crops will also be given to those countries. Another important point is the recognition of the OECD mutual acceptance of data. Can you please go to the next slide? What happened here? I guess we lost the slide that I was talking on. Try to go back. Okay, this one. Thank you. So yeah, it is important that countries will recognize uses and reviews by other agencies. That's part of the OECD guideline for mutual acceptance of data, that countries that do not have MRLs in their own countries should accept either Codex if it's established, or if it doesn't have a Codex MRL, then to accept the data from the country of origin or the export country, and just run a risk assessment to consumers from an importing country. And the MRL will be essentially the same as it's been set in the production and exporting country. Further opportunities will be into the crop groups and representative crops. As I said, Codex has made a great effort to update the crop groups, but countries have not implemented it. Keep in mind that Codex is a voluntary system. There are only, as I said, about 70 countries that incorporate that, but they incorporate mostly the MRL values, not necessarily the crop grouping and the technical criteria that Codex has established. We need to focus, or we would want to focus on supporting registration of newer technology, reduced risk products, also in developing countries, and try to participate or continue participating into multiple stakeholders initiatives that will have representation from regulators, you know, registrants, farmers, or research institutes, in order to enable crop protection innovations and give solutions for minor use production, as well as capacity building opportunities from these three regions of the world. And an e-learning module will be completed and made available to African and Asian countries by the end of this year. On the next slide, please, I just wanted to make a quick emphasis of the Codex Alimentarius, that from the beginning, when it was created in 1963, it is intended to be the global standard. And therefore, you know, I will welcome any kind of cooperation and partnership trying to further strengthen Codex. At this point in time, at least for the specific Codex Committee on Pesticide Residues, they are having a significant backlog that is delaying the MRL setting by 1 or 2 years, depending on what is on the schedule, specific cases on their schedule. So they already have delays of 1 to 2 years, and there is an increased demand for more Codex MRLs than what Codex has been established over the last 50 years. And therefore, you know, there is a specific need for further enhancements in the Codex process such that they will increase the productivity with probably a multiple toolbox of solutions. On the next slide, the goal from CropLife companies is to use Codex as the standard for trade. So Codex should have a global role in coordination with national registrations. Now that we are living in a digital era, it's probably easier to link national, you know, MRL setting programs with the Codex system, and just having Codex validating what has been done at national level and escalate it to the global level for all its members to adopt. This will enable, you know, alliances, minimize uncertainty, and promote a transparent, predictable, and pragmatic system to further enable trade. On the next slide, please. This is my last slide. I will wrap up my short presentation by inviting us to continue cooperating to enable solutions on specialty crops to feed an increasing population. And I just shared these two graphs in there just to show what we are eating currently needs to include more fruits and vegetables essentially. And this is not the way how we produce food these days. So if you see 50% of fruits and vegetables should be part of the human's diet, so far the production is only giving us about 17% of the food representing those two groups that are majorly including specialty crops. So let's join efforts, generate more solutions, and increase the productivity on what humans need to eat, which is more of the specialty crops. So that's all from me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Carmen, for your very insightful presentation. You have taken us through the Codex, MRLs that's in process, the requirements for that, what registrants provide. We know they provide a lot, test materials, methods, data. Well, the other side of it, tox data. And of course, the challenge in meeting is that we need to meet every country's regulatory requirements because every country has a legal framework that has to be met before registration is done. However, the need for harmonization, I think, has been underpinned in this work, in this endeavor, and we could only hope to achieve this more during our work together within the African region. We welcome, of course, a lot of the work that you're spearheading at the CCPR. We know the work started, the work of the revision of the Codex classification started a while back, 38th session, and we have been working slowly throughout these years to see that we have as many crops included, but these commodities also need MRLs or rules on how MRLs will be set. Now, perhaps at this point, I'd like to acknowledge several questions rather, that have been posted. A very interesting one. Michael, you have responded to it, but I think it's something that some other people might ask. Claire Baker from the project. Yes.
Hello.
Is that Nar?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, just a minute. We come to
Thank you.
Claire, you did ask your question on the inclusion, and maybe Michael, you could just emphasize the answer to that question, right? Before we welcome Nar once more to take the floor. Michael, would you like to do that as we give Nar a few seconds to set up?
Sure. Thank you, Lucy. And thank you, Claire, for your question. So the question was concerning about a specific weed that somebody did not see on the list. And so if you're nominating a new priority, if there is a pest that you do not see on the drop-down menu, you go all the way to the bottom of that drop-down menu, and you should see the word other. And when you click on the word other, that will allow you to type the name of any weed or any other pest that you want. So that's only for, obviously, for nominating new priorities, not under the existing priorities.
Great.
I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you have. I see another question by Baku from Morocco. He has asked the question in French, but relates more to the use of crop grouping and the use of the data for wider crops. Perhaps our translator could translate it more accurately for the audience to hear, that we can get an answer for Baku. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. Yes. I see that Baku has proposed to organize workshops to study the possibility of integrating some minor crops into major reference crops to benefit for their MRLs and also reserve funding for others that do not allow. Yes, indeed, Baku, this is really the purpose of why we have a priority setting workshop, so that we can look at which are the minor crops that have been prioritized or nominated by many participants. And using the Codex classification guidelines, we could, the MRLs could apply to a wider group, a more wider subgroup or group of crops that are present. And I think this is right time to get involved in the work, Baku, in Morocco. So probably now at this point, allow me to, do I see another question in the chat? Anybody with a question? Right. Perhaps at this point, we would like to welcome back Nar. And let me repeat, Nar again is a toxicologist working at the Ministry of Health Poison Center. He's also a food safety specialist and works on contaminants, especially in the field of aflatoxin, which is of great interest to many African members here. Under the Residues Program, he is the Senegal team coordinator and also a member of the National Technical Committee of for his country, for the CCPR. He is going to talk to us now on the benefits of a minor use program, specific perspectives from Senegal. And we really want to hear about this because we know Senegal is a developing country in Africa. We welcome you, Nar, bienvenue, after a bit of a challenge, but welcome, thank you.
Et merci Lucie. Donc, je tenais à vous remercier. Pour la présentation, nous avons la présentation en anglais. Est-ce que vous pouvez peut-être basculer en français? Voilà, en attendant qu'on fasse des réglages. Donc, j'ai vraiment l'honneur je remercie la Fondation de m'avoir l'honneur de vous présenter les avantages de l'usage mineur au niveau du Sénégal.
Perhaps, sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Nar, but perhaps every time you would like the slide to move to the next slide, just indicate next slide and it shall be moved for you. Thank you.
OK, donc par rapport à ça, nous avons la version en anglais. Est-ce que je peux avoir la version française?
The French version, the English version is on the slide and you can proceed with your presentation. English version is on display. Proceed, Dr. Nar.
Voilà, OK, donc voilà la présentation. Donc, j'ai un peu inversé. Donc, par rapport aux avantages du projet, nous allons vous parler de ce que nous avons eu comme expérience. Donc, ici, au niveau du Sénégal, nous allons partir du contexte. Vous parlez du contexte. Et nous allons parler du contexte qui est généralement le même contexte que l'Afrique. Vous parlez aussi des recommandations, les recommandations du premier et deuxième sommet des usages mineurs. Et en même temps, vous parlez d'un exemple de paquet de projets qui a été piloté par les usages mineurs et vous donnez l'exemple du projet de génération de données au niveau du Sénégal et les perspectives. Donc, par rapport au contexte, voilà, par rapport au contexte, vous pouvez revenir au contexte. Par rapport au contexte, nous avions niveau du Sénégal et comme au niveau de l'Afrique, une absence de limite nationale par rapport à certains produits ou bien des limites de résidus à la mer. Ce qui fait que la plupart de ces limites-là sont assimilées aux limites de qualification par les pays importateurs. Et la plupart des producteurs utilisent ce qu'on appelle des produits toxiques, plus ou moins dangereux, et par méconnaissance. Ils utilisent ces produits parce que tout simplement, c'est ce qu'ils trouvaient comme alternative. Et ce qui entraînait souvent des pertes économiques et des impacts négatifs sur l'environnement et la santé. Alors qu'à ce moment, il y a d'autres produits qui sont moins toxiques et qui sont disponibles quelque part dans le monde sur le marché mondial, mais qui sont en souffrance de données africaines et de limites maximales de résidus, donc des données scientifiques. Et par conséquent, on a un accès limité au marché d'exportation, l'absence de normes commerciales pour les cultures d'exportation des pays africains et l'exposition de la population africaine aux résidus des pesticides toxiques. Slide, s'il vous plaît. Et partant de ce fait, lors du sommet, du premier sommet et du second sommet mondial sur les usages mineurs, il y avait 4 recommandations phares qu'on avait. C'était l'amélioration, améliorer le partage des données et des informations, accroître le renforcement des capacités, améliorer la prise en charge des utilisations mineures et établir des projets pilotes collaboratifs internationaux pour encourager le partage du travail et l'examen des données. Slide. Par rapport à la mise en œuvre de ces 2 recommandations, de ces 4 recommandations, il y avait un paquet de projets qui a été élaboré. Donc,
So perhaps, Dr. Nar, could you...
C'est bon, donc c'est ça. Donc, vous me recevez correctement, c'est bon. Voilà, donc par rapport à l'amélioration des partages de données et des informations, là, on a parlé des recommandations. Slide, s'il vous plaît. Slide. Voilà, donc il y avait un paquet de projets, c'est le projet mondial sur les résidus des fruits tropicaux. Et ce paquet de projets concernait presque tous les continents. Il y avait l'Amérique, l'Afrique et les autres continents. Et pour l'Afrique, nous avions pas mal de projets, surtout concernant les différentes régions. Il y avait la région ouest, centre et au nord, avec d'autres participations telles que l'Égypte, Ghana, Kenya, Sénégal, Tanzanie et l'Ouganda. Slide, s'il vous plaît. Donc, ces projets nous ont permis d'avoir ce qu'on appelle un projet de génération de données. Donc, l'Union africaine, à travers l'AUBAR et l'USAID et l'OMC, ont élaboré conjointement le projet africain de génération de données sur les résidus des pesticides, ce qui nous a permis de bénéficier des financements total de plus de 1 million, ce qui représentait plus de demi-milliard de francs CFA. Et donc, il nous a permis d'avoir ces financements-là et de commencer ce qu'on appelle une première expérience en génération de données concernant les pesticides, les résidus des pesticides. Et il faudrait le noter, il y avait une durée assez longue par rapport à cette première expérience qui partait du 1er mai 2013 jusqu'à 2019, donc 6 ans. On a eu cette expérience interrégionale par rapport à cette étude. Donc, pour la couverture géographique de cette étude, on avait 5 participants. Il y avait le Ghana, Kenya, Sénégal, Tanzanie et l'Ouganda qui faisaient ce qu'on appelle les essais de terrain. Par contre, il y avait 4 pays observateurs à côté, donc tels que le Bénin, Cameroun, Mali, Zambie, et il y avait même le Maroc qui étaient comme des pays observateurs. Slide, s'il vous plaît. Donc, l'objectif du projet de génération de données était d'améliorer la capacité régionale de l'Afrique en matière de génération et de surveillance des données sur les résidus, afin de répondre aux exigences d'exportation de pesticides sur la base des normes internationales. Slide. Donc, pour les partenaires d'exécution, on avait l'Union africaine, donc, qui faisait la coordination de ce projet. Donc, comme partenaire technique et financier, il y avait l'USDA et IFOR. Et partenaires financiers, on avait STDF et FAO qui participait techniquement par rapport à ce projet. Et il y avait aussi le PIP. Au niveau national, le projet était supporté par le Comité national Codex, qui est logé au niveau du centre antipoison, au niveau du ministère de la Santé. Il y avait aussi la direction de la protection des végétaux, qui est au niveau du ministère de l'Agriculture. Il y avait le laboratoire Ceres Locustox, idem aussi, qui est au niveau du ministère de l'Agriculture. Il y avait le centre de recherche horticole et il y avait aussi les producteurs tels que Safina, qui faisaient partie de ces projets. Donc, quand vous regardez cette présentation, vous allez voir qu'il y avait ce qu'on appelle une multisectorialité par rapport à ce projet. Et il y avait aussi la collaboration au niveau international qu'il faudrait vraiment magnifier. Et ça, ce sont des résultats qu'il faudrait peut-être considérer par rapport à ça. Slide, s'il vous plaît. Donc, pour le processus, comment le projet s'est déroulé pour la mise en œuvre. Donc, on avait ce qu'on appelle un renforcement de capacité des membres de l'équipe sur la préparation d'études de génération de données. Donc, il y avait aussi des essais au champ. Il y avait aussi des bonnes pratiques au laboratoire. Il y avait le management d'une étude de génération de données sur les RMR, la démarche assurance qualité, et il y a pas mal de points qu'on avait déjà considérés. Donc, quand vous regardez ces photos, c'était le workshop qu'on avait organisé au mois de février au Ghana, donc tout à fait au début du projet. Et il y avait pas mal de points qui ont été abordés dans ce projet-là. Donc, il y avait le cadrage de ce projet. Donc, on avait passé en revue tout ce qui est GLP. Il y avait aussi le protocole qui a été revu par l'ensemble des membres participants, les pays qui devaient faire des essais sur le terrain et les observateurs. Il y avait aussi le field notebook qu'on avait aussi revu. On avait aussi revu comment il fallait faire la calibration et la qualité assurance et l'audit. Donc, par rapport à ces formations-là, on a fait des formations sur le terrain aussi, pratiques, théoriques et pratiques, et aussi des formations de laboratoire. Slide, s'il vous plaît. Donc, ça, c'est au niveau national. Donc, au niveau national, nous avons été accompagnés aussi par le programme. Donc, quand vous regardez ces photos, vous allez constater avec moi qu'il y a la présence de Joe Di Francisca, bon, que nous félicitons, que nous remercions encore davantage. Et il y avait aussi Michael par rapport aux autres projets et Jason qui était souvent avec nous sur le terrain. Et là, ce que vous voyez à gauche, ce sont les tests au champ, donc les traitements qu'on avait fait. Et il y a aussi au niveau laboratoire ce qu'on fait. On faisait aussi le débriefing avant de commencer, c'est tout à fait au milieu. Et souvent, on faisait le cadrage du projet et revue de tout ce qu'on faisait au niveau du centre antipoison. Donc, du début, on avait ce qu'on appelle la réunion de cadrage, des formations, des visites au niveau des autorités. Donc, c'était un nouveau produit qu'on devait importer, donc il fallait essayer d'être en phase avec la registration, les autorités de registration des pesticides, faire des prospections au niveau des champs pour voir quel est le champ qui est vraiment adapté par rapport à ce projet-là. Puis, on a fait des marquages et l'expérimentation. Et la récolte de transport aussi, c'était important. Donc, ce sont des points phares que nous avons vraiment notés par rapport à l'exécution de ce projet. Slide, s'il vous plaît. Donc, dans l'ensemble, ce que nous avions comme bénéfice, c'était la capacité technique d'entreprendre les bonnes pratiques que ce soit au niveau des pratiques de laboratoire et le développement des capacités d'essai sur le terrain. Il y avait aussi la possibilité d'établir des limites maximales de résidus internationaux représentatifs pour les fruits tropicaux, tels que la mangue et un produit chimique, tel que le sulfaxoflore. Il y avait aussi la possibilité pour les agriculteurs d'accéder à des pesticides sûrs, d'améliorer leurs revenus et leur accès au marché. Il y a aussi le potentiel d'amélioration des exportations de fruits et de croissance économique pour les pays. Les deux photos que vous voyez à côté, donc ça c'est le field notebook et l'autre c'est le rapport concernant les tests d'efficacité. Donc ce sont les livrables par rapport à ce projet-là. Et Dieu merci que le projet a été, les données ont été acceptées et étudiées par le Tiemper et maintenant le sulfaxolone est considéré comme un produit avec des limites que nous utilisons. Slide s'il vous plaît. Donc, sur un autre registre, là, on peut voir au niveau international pour les avantages pour les politiques et initiatives internationales, régionales et nationales. L'atteinte des objectifs du programme nous permettra d'atteindre les objectifs en partie des objectifs du millénaire pour le développement, tels que les OMD1, éradiquer la pauvreté, ça peut participer à ça, surtout quand on est dans un pays en développement. Donc, les OMD 7, la durabilité au niveau environnemental, l'utilisation de ces produits qui sont dits entre guillemets propres nous permettait de mieux sauvegarder notre environnement. Il y a aussi l'OMD Partenariat mondial pour le développement. C'est un exemple patent par rapport à ce projet-là où on a les pays de l'Afrique de l'Est comme les pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest en faisant un surpassement sur tout ce qui est barrière linguistique. Il y avait au niveau régional aussi le pilier numéro 2 du programme détaillé pour le développement de l'agriculture en Afrique, qui est un cadre établi pour stimuler la croissance économique et la sécurité alimentaire grâce à un investissement accru dans l'agriculture. Ce qu'il faudrait aussi noter par rapport au programme et à la fondation des usages mineurs, c'est ce qu'on appelle la plateforme d'échange, de communication entre les parties prenantes. Ça, c'est un cadre vraiment idéal pour qu'on puisse partager des problèmes, des solutions et essayer de trouver des perspectives par rapport à à la problématique liée aux résidus des pesticides. Slide, s'il vous plaît. Dans l'ensemble, ce qui a été, donc, pour les principaux bénéficiaires sont les agriculteurs, avec le rendement qui va augmenter, l'entreprise d'exportation agroalimentaire, les consommateurs pour la santé, les autorités de réglementation qui peuvent maintenant disposer de données scientifiques qui leur permettraient au moins de voir l'exposition alimentaire par rapport à ces pesticides-là et de trouver peut-être des limites qui sont acceptables par rapport à ces pays. Et les associations aussi des industriels. Slide, s'il vous plaît. Donc, c'est un projet qui avait quelque part aussi des limites. Donc, il n'y a pas de projet ou bien de programme indemne de toute critique et de reproches. Là, ce sont des challenges et des recommandations que nous avions peut-être élaborées avec nous dans le temps. Et c'était le respect des délais de réalisation, parce que pour une expérience, c'est compréhensible parce qu'on se cherchait. Mais je crois que dès que l'expérience est acquise, on peut aller beaucoup plus vite, surtout par rapport à la réalisation de ces projets. Donc, respect des délais et l'engagement des secteurs privés, publics et privés. Il y a aussi le problème de logistique interne comme externe. Mais je crois que par rapport à ce projet-là, c'était important dans la mesure où ça nous a permis au moins d'évaluer ce qu'on avait comme capacité au niveau national. Donc, nos forces et nos faiblesses, les menaces, voilà, tout ça, ça a été revu et ça nous a permis au moins de relever notre plateau technique concernant l'analyse au niveau de CRS Logistox, et qui est un laboratoire de référence même au niveau de l'Afrique et au niveau régional. Il y avait aussi la considération des connaissances et des bénéfices des études. Donc, comme recommandation, nous demandons à ce qu'on consolide les acquis du projet. Je crois que la Fondation va nous aider, inclure plus de pays de la région, d'autant plus que nous appartenons à ce qu'on appelle le CEDEAO, qui est vraiment un comité de 15 pays Si nous avons d'autres pays, ça nous aiderait beaucoup plus à avoir une bonne information et d'harmoniser ensemble ce qu'on fait comme lutte alternative par rapport à ces déprédateurs. Il y a aussi renforcer l'engagement entre le secteur public et privé, renforcer le cadre institutionnel de gestion.
Now, could you try and come closer to the microphone? The translator is having challenge hearing.
Slide, s'il vous plaît. Slide, s'il vous plaît. Slide. Yeah. Maintenant, nous venons aux perspectives. Perspectives, slide sur les perspectives. Donc, pour les perspectives, nous avons 3 points phares. C'était mettre en place un programme de lutte sécurisé contre les ravageurs, les déprédateurs des cultures mineures. Permettre au Sénégal et aux autres pays, comme je le disais tantôt, surtout ouest-africains, de chercher de façon proactive et de développer des stratégies de lutte antiparasitaire adaptées. Et continuer la collaboration davantage avec la Fondation des usages mineurs pour générer plus de données et de participer activement au processus de normalisation internationale au Codex et même au SPS et aussi au niveau du CSP. Slide, s'il vous plaît. Donc, merci de votre aimable attention. Je vais saisir cette opportunité aussi pour rendre hommage à quelqu'un qui nous a quittés et qui était notre fil de chercheur. C'était Samba Diaouba. Il a beaucoup participé, il s'est beaucoup donné par rapport à la réalisation de ce projet-là. Et paix en son âme. Merci de votre aimable attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nar. And we are very appreciative of the presentation, notwithstanding the challenges that we had. It was very good to hear your perspective of the benefits of participating in this collaborative project that was done some years back. We thank you for that. Perhaps you'd like to also stay online. We hope you can stay online. We see further questions. I think this is a very good time for questions. We still have a few more minutes, perhaps 13 more minutes before the top of the hour. Any questions? Anyone with a question can place the Q in the chat box. You have the information on the Minor Use Foundation website, and you can visit it to get acquainted and start, of course, the nomination process, the prioritization process, if you like. Any questions so far? Thank you very much. Perhaps, Michael, you'd like to come back with the follow-up question I see from Claire on the specifics, detailing the not just the control of weed. Perhaps you could just clarify for all members to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the main point of the question in her follow-up was that she would appreciate if people can be more specific on the pest. And I followed up by saying, yeah, not only being more specific, in other words, not just say all weeds or all broadleaf weeds, but maybe, you know, specific ones that you might have a problem with. And the same holds true for insects or diseases. In fact, if you want to be the most helpful, if you can include the scientific name, then when we pass the information on to registrants, they can be more focused and be assured that they are considering the right pest. There was also a question about extrapolation from major crops to minor crops, and I'm not sure if I fully understood that question. Lucy, I believe, referred to it and extrapolation in the sense of crop grouping. And I think I gave a similar response that, if you are going through the nomination process and want to make this a very efficient program, what you can do is to nominate the representative crops. And if we have a combination of representative crops that form a whole crop group, we would not only get the crop group, but also get all of the crops that it represents. So covering the ultra minor crops. Now, I'm not sure if that actually relates to the question of extrapolation from major crops, but that is, I think, my interpretation. And if there's a more specific interpretation of the question, or if I have not answered it correctly, please let me know. And I see Carmen has raised.
Thank you.
Hand. So maybe she can add to that. Or has another question.
Carmen, perhaps you could.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, just a quick addition on what Michael just said is that from the registrant view, when we propose solutions, so realize that what Michael has described is the nomination process that will go through voting and prioritization. After that, the next step, registrants are going to come up to propose solutions if they have anything, in the company portfolios. When we do that, we are also pointing out if MRLs or data exists for that crop or other crops from the same group. So that's another step of verification. I mean, it's okay to nominate representative crops, as Michael suggested from the beginning, but at the same time, there is another filter at the step where the registrants are proposing solutions that we are usually saying we might have data on other crops from or on that same crop in other country, so whatever data exists, other countries, other similar crops from the same group or the same pest in other crop, usually that's mentioned by the registrant in the inputs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carmen. I believe that has provided some further insight to how the process could be refined and utilized to be more useful. Perhaps I want to come back again to the point that you raised in your presentation, that we still have the outstanding issue of okra. And it seems okra will be a challenge in this region because okra, as you are well aware, is grown in Africa. We still do not have a decisive placement on where the subgroup that okra could be on so that it could benefit from MRLs. Perhaps this is an opportunity for participants to also critically examine the priorities in okra so that trials could actually lead up to data being generated for MRLs. But at this point, I wish to recognize the hand of Dr. Hend from Egypt. Dr. Hend, you have your hand up. You have the floor.
Yes, good evening. How are you? How are you, Lucy? I'm happy I'm happy to attend this workshop. This is very important for determination MRL. As you know, we are working on this project in 2015 in guava as azoxystrobin and difluconazole in guava, and it is submitted to Codex. So I wanted to have you with this project in the community that we can choose in, and our lab can do this. This is we already do 2 projects. One with IR4 for MRL, and the last project last year was monitoring and surveying maize and the tomato, and the two project is doing with successful way. Many thanks for you.
Thank you very much for that information. Indeed, Egypt did participate as an additional country outside the ones that were supported by STDF, but perhaps, Michael, you'd like to answer more specifically the question raised by Dr. Hend.
Yes, so I'm certainly familiar with the work on guava that was performed, and we thank Egypt for their participation. We can consider, additional projects if there is a need for those projects that relate to crops that are grown in Egypt and come up as priorities.
Thank you very much, Michael. So maybe just to encourage Dr. Hend, please go ahead and nominate or select as many priorities as possible and include guava. As we still have 4 minutes in the call, 4 minutes in the workshop, I see no hands up, but if there are questions, follow-up questions, there is a hand raised. We have a hand raised, the person with the hand raised. I'm not able to see it. Kindly take the floor.
Jeffrey?
Jeffrey, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Lucy, and thank you, all the participants. I think this is a very interesting discussion when it comes to the issue of okra, and I think coming as good enough pointed out to chili pepper, though I know JMPR has to still look at this chili pepper from a data point of view. My other side of the discussion would be maybe again throw it back to industry. I know we shall come up with the list of priorities. My issue would be the flexibility around the unsupported compounds with no public health concerns. The reason why I'm raising that, I know because in terms of the internal discussions at industry level, I don't know whether you look at that opportunity of coming up to support unsupported compounds with no public health concerns, because this is already an issue, and looking at the database of national registrations of compounds, some of these compounds are registered, and I believe most of the African countries are still using these compounds, and then they need this MRL, and then they need to trade in these commodities. So it's something we need to see how we can open up that thinking within at the level of the registrants and look at that opportunity. Because I know subsequently what is going to come up, say from this priority, it will be either a follow-up evaluation on compounds which already have MRLs or new compounds. That would be the direction really. But my interest would be, can we further interrogate the unsupported and see whether, we can come up with something? Because I know quietly we still have these issues, and you saw it in the last meeting, how the issue of chlorophyrophos started evolving, and then again, it took us in a different direction. That's really my submission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. Indeed, the issue of unsupported pesticides or compounds is one that I think we have spoken a lot at length about, and this will be something that we would like the industry to consider. Any further hands up, perhaps at this point? We still have 1 minute, and 1 minute will be for the lucky close of the meeting. But I think in general, we have heard.
Hello.
Yes, please, your hand.
Yeah, I didn't raise my, I tried to raise the hand, but I didn't find, so I don't know how to proceed. But just one question to Mr. Dr. Narjian from Senegal. So after this big project, so did you succeed to have some data as announced in this program? Or it was just a capacity building program? Thank you.
Perhaps to just answer on behalf of NAR, I know he's on the call. The benefits were perhaps threefold. First, there was a lot of capacity building that supported the various institutions in generated the data. Second, there was the data that was actually generated and put together to make a submission for request of the MRL. And third, there was the MRL that has actually now gone through, the MRL for the mango and sulfoxaflor. So really that was the benefit. It was a really good program that the capacity that has been built could be used for further projects such as those that come from here. Perhaps now you'd like to add a little more. Thank you.
Oui, merci Lucie. Je crois que vous avez bien répondu. Et effectivement, nous avons vraiment commencé depuis jusqu'à la fin, jusqu'à la soumission des données. Et c'était une expérience, une belle expérience. On a fait des renforcements de capacités théoriques comme pratiques. Et on a été sur le terrain aussi avec les techniciens. Et finalement, on a eu deux documents. On avait des documents, le rapport concernant les tests d'efficacité, ce qui nous a permis au moins d'apprécier le produit que nous a amené. Et l'autre aussi, c'était par rapport aux résidus de données et par rapport aux données des résidus. Ces données-là ont été soumis au niveau du CCPR et ça a été accepté. Et fort heureusement, ça c'est une belle expérience que nous magnifions. Donc, on a fait la formation et finalement les résultats ont été acceptés. Et merci.
Thank you very much, Nar. I see a question that came in from Morocco, from Baku in Morocco, that we should not forget the harmonization of the use of Codex MRLs and in particular with Europe. And I think this is a whole topic of discussion for another day. That is really where we hope that the future work of Codex will be to enhance harmonization on the use of Codex MRLs by many countries. Having come to the end of this session, we are 3 minutes or so into the end of the presentation. First, I'd like to just thank everyone for your time and your active participation and keen participation. We now have the procedure of how we can go ahead and prioritize our nominations, and we look forward to seeing the nominations, and we will certainly have another engagement on fine-tuning our nominations. And for me, it has been a pleasure being your moderator for today, Lucy, and thank you very much. Much appreciate the effort and the coordination made by the Minor Use Foundation in setting up this workshop. Thank you very much, participants, and I look forward to seeing you during our next meeting. Thank you. Thank you very much.